Majority Whip, thank you for your comments on the Zika virus. You're absolutely right to raise the awareness of that issue. It is a great concern, and we happen to have in Ohio some military assets that have been used in the past for aerial spraying, and I know they're interested in being even more involved in some of the eradication of some of these mosquitoes in the southern part of the country who may end up causing some of this infection. So it's a very serious matter, and I'm glad to know that the Appropriations Committee is working on it, as well as our authorizing committees, and you have a personal interest in this. I rise today to talk a little about the underlying legislation. It's the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, and I want to thank the chairman of that committee, Chairman Alexander, for working with me to include a couple of really important provisions for the state of Ohio. One is the cleanup of what's called the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant. And this is a site that for a half a century enriched uranium. This uranium was used by our nuclear navy for our military and other purposes, including our nuclear arsenals, but also has been used for our power plants. And so the people, in Piketon, Ohio, have been for decades now helping keep America safe and also helping thousands of Ohioans to keep the lights on and to stay warm at a reasonable cost. Now we have to clean up this facility. We've moved on to other technology. It's an efficient technology, but it's a heck of a cleanup of removing all of this gaseous diffusion material and properly disposing of it. It employs now about 2,000 Ohioans, this cleanup effort, and they're doing their job and doing it very well. We've got to support them. Unfortunately, over the years, they have not gotten the support they deserved. The president in 2008 gave in a campaign trip to Ohio, gave a commitment that he would accelerate that cleanup. Frankly, that just hasn't happened in the president's budgets. And so every year we have to fight for more funding to be sure that we can continue the cleanup, which is so important, but also to ensure that we aren't losing jobs in a county in Ohio, Pike County, where we just had this tragic occurrence where we had 4 different homes where family members were present. There was a horrible shooting out there in Pike County. This is one of the counties in Ohio that has relatively high unemployment. It's a county that's got a lot of economic issues, and these 2,000 jobs are good-paying jobs with good benefits. So it's very important we keep the jobs there. But as important, it's the right thing to do for the taxpayer, because as the Obama administration has pulled back funding for this cleanup, it ends up costing the taxpayers more. Why do I say that? Because as you delay these cleanups, you end up with huge additional costs. As you cut back on the funding, there's less cleanup going on, to the point that our analysis shows that an accelerated cleanup could save the taxpayers $4 billion. Getting this thing done, moving the site onto a commercial use. So it'll save the taxpayers money by having adequate funding. Second, cleaning up the radioactive waste there and other hazardous waste is incredibly important for the community. It makes that site cleaner, of course. It's better for the environment, and it's really important for these people, again, who for many years have been providing us with the enriched uranium for our military and for our power plants, to know that they're not going to be left with this environmental problem. Third, again, these are good-paying jobs in a county that really needs them. And finally, we owe it to the community to clean up the site so they can redevelop it. And they want to reindustrialize the site. And it's a great location to do maybe some energy projects, maybe a nuclear power plant at some point, and some other exciting opportunities. But they've got to clean up what's there in order for the site to be used for that. So the people of Piketon have helped fuel our economy and our national defense. We owe it to them to clean up this site. And I'm very pleased that in this legislation we're considering that we have an increase of $20 million over this year's level of cleanup work at the site, and an additional $20 million over this year's level for constructing a needed on-site disposal cell, because we're at the point now where we need to dispose some of this material, and we need more funding for that disposal cell. I'm hoping that the House will even increase the funding for the disposal cell a little more, and if so, we'll work in conference to get that number up further, because that makes a lot of sense in order to actually move forward on this cleanup for all the reasons that I've stated. Again, I want to thank Senator Alexander for his help on this. One thing, as the chairman knows well, part of the funding for this cleanup work comes from the Department of Energy's barter of uranium. I asked that as we move forward with the completion of this legislation over the next few months, if the price of uranium should change, should drop, that the chairman continue to work with us to ensure there are no job losses and ensure that this cleanup work is not delayed as it has been in the past. Second, I want to thank the chairman for including another provision that's incredibly important to Ohio and to Lake Erie. For many years, the Army Corps of Engineers has been dredging the Cuyahoga River. It's necessary to do that for commercial purposes. We have a big steel plant right there, which anybody who comes to the Republican convention will see. It's really important for that plant and other commercial purposes to keep this waterway open for boat traffic, including bringing iron ore in for the steel mill. Unfortunately, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wants to take the dredge from the river and dump it in Lake Erie. And time again, the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and others have said that's just not good for the environment. Specifically, the dredge has PCB material in it. This PCB pollutant then gets into the fish. In fact, the EPA has told them, the Ohio EPA, if they keep dumping it in the lake, at some point they're going to have to issue a warning that the walleye in Lake Erie, which is our great game fish, is not to be eaten more than a certain number of times per month. This would kill the fishing industry. And it's also just the wrong thing to do with all of our algal bloom problems we have in the lake, because that's driven by nitrogen, phosphorus mostly, and these nutrients would get into the lake through this dumping. So what we're saying is, let's use an on-site disposal facility. We have one on land that they can use. And they are refusing to do that. The Army Corps of Engineers going so far in the last appropriations bill to actually cut their own funding, which is something I've never seen before, to not be able to meet the requirement that we had put into law saying they have to provide for the disposal of this product not into the lake, but onto a land facility. We've now worked with Chairman Alexander to include language in this legislation before us. Senator Sherrod Brown and I were successful in getting that in last year. Once again, we're working with the chairman to get that language in this year. And again, I want to thank Chairman Alexander for including it. It maintains this requirement that ensures that the Corps upholds its funding obligations to dispose of this dredge material upland and not in the lake. Again, it concerns me that the Corps seems to want to try to get around this. In fact, instead of putting money into the operations and maintenance account, that they are required to do so to comply with not just what Congress says, but frankly what the court has ordered them to do, because the court has consistently said they have to dredge and then dump on land. They have actually put that into a risky position by saying that they don't need the funding. They've gone so far as to indicate that maybe other dredging projects on Lake Erie or other Lake Erie funding could be in jeopardy of not receiving the full money they need if there is a need to dispose this on land. There's a better way. The Corps should simply request use of unallocated funds provided by Congress in order to dispose of the dredge material at the Cleveland Harbor safely without putting other projects at risk. They can do that. Our permanent subcommittee investigations, which I chair, is currently investigating whether the Corps intentionally requested this decrease in funding that I mentioned in last year's spending bill so that they would have no choice but to dump this dredge material into the harbor. I hope that's not true. I hope we find out that that's not what happened, but there are some indications of that. Again, doing so would threaten the health of the area, the city of Cleveland, Lake Erie's ecosystem, and specifically our fishing industry in Lake Erie, which is so critical to economic growth in that area. Lake Erie is the most productive of all of our Great Lakes in terms of fishing. It's a $6 billion fishing industry and our #1 tourist attraction in Ohio. So I urge the Corps to revise their work plan for this year to request the additional funds necessary to safely dispose of the dredge sediment at the Cleveland Harbor during this 2016 dredging season. If, as I suspect, the federal judge again rules that the Corps cannot place it in Lake Erie. And I urge them to work with us to come up with a solution where we can have this dredge material go on land and then actually recycle that material and use it for other purposes so that it has value. I saw even a couple weeks ago when I was out at the site how some of this material is being mixed with other fill and being used not just for landfill, but also for gardens, for farm agriculture purposes. And this is a way to take this dredge and actually have it have value and be able to recycle it. So, Mr. President, I thank you for allowing me to give this statement today, for your patience, and I really want to thank Chairman Alexander and others who have worked with us on this so that we can indeed be sure we're cleaning up this site at Piketon, and second, that we are able to get this dredge material coming out of the Cuyahoga River onto a site on land to avoid the environmental damage that would otherwise occur. I yield back my time, Mr. President.